Now that your workbook is saved as a macro-enabled workbook, the next thing that we're going to want to do is start experimenting a little bit more with the macro recorder. What I'm going to do, it's not going to be anything fancy. I'm going to close out this workbook that I have and open up a brand new workbook. And what I want to show you is how you can experiment with the macro recorder. That way you can look at how VBA code is created when you're using the macro recorder, and you can even relate to it so you can see what the code looks like and the actions you took, how they relate to that code. So I'm going to go to my developers tab and click record macro. I'm going to name this macro random testing, and I'm going to go on and select OK. Right now the macro recorder is recording, and we know that because at the top it says stop recording. And what I'm going to do is select cell C2, and I'm just going to type in 1 and then hit enter. It brings me down to C3, and I'm just going to continue on until I get to 10. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select cell C2. I'm going to make that bold. I'm going to select cell C3. I'm going to color the for color. I'm going to color it red. And then I'm going to select C4, highlight that yellow. C5, I'm going to put a border around it. And then C6, I'm just going to clear it out. And then C7, we'll just make it underlined. And with that being done, I'm just going to select cell A1, click my developers tab again, and then hit stop recording. And the only thing I did right here is just experiment with the macro recorder because I wanted to see how the VBA code looks once we actually view the code. So I'm going to go on and go to my macros, random testing. We're going to click edit. And here we can see, it may be overwhelming at first, but here we can see what the macro recorder did. And rest assured, it's actually very simple to follow. It's nothing difficult at all. It's just a matter of reading it line by line. The very first thing that we did was select range C2. So we have range C2.select. And then in the active cell, formula R1C1, we put the number 1. Then we selected C3. It went to a 2. We then selected C4 and changed it to a 3. And so all this code is very similar because all we did was go each cell one by one and just did an increment by 1, starting at 1. And then the next thing that we did is we selected range C2. With it selected, we made the font as bold. So the macro recorder wrote font.bold is equal to true. The next thing we did was we selected range C3, and we modified the font color. In this case, we made it red. Now this is code that's set up here in VBA. That's not something that you're expected to memorize, but later on we'll show tables on how you can assign these colors manually. The next thing that we did is we selected range C4, and at C4 we highlighted that yellow. So we have selection.interior. We changed, well, we didn't change the pattern, but Excel does create this. It put it as Excel solid. The pattern color index is still automatic. This is what we changed right here, the color. We didn't modify the tint and shade nor the pattern tint and shade, but Excel, the recorder, does create this code for you when you make a modification to the interior of a cell. And then the next thing we did was we selected range C5. With range C5, we made a border around it. This is all the code for the border. It actually doesn't end till down here. That's all of the code that was needed for the border. My mistakes, it actually goes down a little bit more. Down to the selection.borders, we have the inside horizontal and vertical lines. So all of that code right there was created by the VBA environment, the macro recorder. So that's all this code is right here. Then we selected range C6. All we did was we cleared it out. Range C7. We selected that, and then we made it, we underlined it, and then lastly we did A1. So this is just a real quick experiment on what you can do to reverse engineer your code. You know, simply follow along like what steps you actually took on your Excel workbook, and then go back and look at the code. Now you're not expected to learn how the macro recorder does this. In later videos, I'm going to show a lot more detail on how you can create your own macros. The code doesn't look as complicated. It's rather basic, hence the term Visual Basic. It's a pretty basic language.